Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Today we have our special guest, Brother Steve Pidgeon, here with us to discuss the Middle East upheaval, what is happening there, Russia, the United States, their involvement in what's going on in the Middle East, Turkey, what's happening with Turkey, and they're leading the way, trying to bring the Arabic nations against Jerusalem. How does this fit in biblical prophecy? What are we looking at when it comes to Jerusalem, which seems to be the prize that so many are wanting, and Rome itself? Do they have anything to do with the events that we're seeing transpiring before us? And I have to say to you, friends, before we even get started, today I sent a message to Dr. Pidgeon about this issue, about Gog of Magog, and something the Lord had revealed to me today. He wrote nearly verbatim in a response to me, just kind of summarizing his thoughts. So I think it's going to be a very interesting broadcast, and I'm sure it'll be a blessing to you. Dr. Pidgeon, welcome to Israeli News Live, and we are excited to have you on. So many people appreciate you, and of course, those of you who can see on the screen the Et Sefer in the background, I love it, and you can always get a copy of it if you haven't got a copy as of yet. We'll talk more about that at the end of the broadcast here. But Dr. Pidgeon, welcome, and we're glad to have you here today.
Well, Stephen, shalom, shalom. It's such a pleasure to be on Israeli News Live again, my favorite all-time YouTube channel. And it's just great. And, having discussed so many of the things with you privately, we know that we're at a critical hour now. We've really arrived at a critical hour. And I think today we're going to have a discussion about some of the prophecy and how the prophecy plays out and what that prophecy means, because we're going to see some things that I think are going to be shocking, surprising. And again, for those who think that that we favor Russia in this particular discussion, that's not the case at all. My favorite people on earth are Yasharel, the people of the children of Israel, the children of Yaakov, and the 12 tribes and those who sojourn with them. That's where my allegiance is. That's where it is now, and that's where it will always be. And as for the governments and in the world and what they do, well, it depends on how they respect Scripture, how they respect the Word, as to how I feel about them. And there's really no discrepancy otherwise. And they can claim whatever they want to claim. They can try to claim righteousness, but none are good, not one. And so as a consequence, but I want to begin here today, if we can, talking about this nascent Sanhedrin. And the nascent Sanhedrin have done some very interesting things. One of the most important things they've done is to issue this recent half shekel, the temple half shekel. And the temple half shekel has, of course, it has three names on the coin. It says Balfour, Cyrus, and Trump. And of course, the Hebrew name there for Cyrus is Koresh. But what we see there is this half shekel. And this half shekel is comparing Trump to Cyrus. However, I think it's important. I think the Sanhedrin are onto something here, which is that the Balfour Declaration, which came in 1917, this Balfour Declaration came in immediately after the capture of Jerusalem during Hanukkah, the first day of Hanukkah in 1917. So we know it was at the end of the year in 1917. And the Balfour Declaration moves ahead, and at that time, the whole of the Levant, if you will, or the Adam HaKodesh, the Holy Land, was given back into the hands of Ephraim. That is to say, the British Empire. British, the covenant man. It was given back into the hands of Ephraim, as was expressed in 1 Chronicles 5:1. Now, once it was in the hands of Ephraim, what happened? Well, the Balfour Declaration happened, and the Balfour Declaration happened in strict accord with Zephaniah 2:7 and with Zechariah 12:11, which is going to specify that the tribes of Judah, the tents of Judah, would be repatriated to the coastlands first. And so this happened with the declaration that divided the Adam HaKodesh, which at that time, prior to that, was part of the Ottoman Empire. In other words, it was unincorporated. You had the Ottoman Empire being controlled out of Istanbul, and it was just kind of a giant territorial area. There was no dividing line. There were tribal sects, and there was Lebanon, of course. But a ruler was taken out to draw Syria, to draw Iraq, to draw Kuwait, to draw Jordan, and to draw Israel. It was a ruler. And they drew Israel down the Jordan River. A very important marker because there was a two-state solution in the Transjordan. Everything to the east of the Jordan would be Arabic. Everything to the west of the Jordan would be Israeli or Jewish, the tribes of the Yahudim. Now, this was the deal that was made in 1917 in the Balfour Declaration, and that is the deal that stands. The UN then tried to mitigate that deal with a two-state solution, imposing a two-state solution on the two-state solution. And should they be allowed to get away with that, they'll impose a two-state solution on what remains, until eventually you have the Jews in one block in Tel Aviv and everybody else on the other side. So the concretization as a matter of law for the state of Israel took place in the Balfour Declaration. That's recognized in the nascent Sanhedrin's half shekel. Now, the nascent Sanhedrin has also called for the tribes of Ishmael, the leaders of the tribes of Ishmael, to embrace the new temple, because the new temple is coming. This is the prophecy of Daniel 9:24. In Daniel 9:24, you see the end of that, it says, and to anoint the Holy of Holies. It is a prophecy concerning the return of the temple. And so the third temple is expected. Now, it will not be a temple like Solomon's temple, or even like Herod's temple, but it's going to be a papal temple. We've already seen the CAD draw up of it. It's nothing like Solomon's temple. It's going to be something entirely different. It's going to be a temple for all nations, and an ecumenical temple, if you will. Nonetheless, that I wanted to draw that initial precedent because, as we talked before, Stephen, you know, Jerusalem, with Trump's proclamation that the American embassy is going to be moved to Jerusalem, at the moment he said that, Jerusalem became a cup of trembling for the whole world. Now, people might say, well, look, you know, there's a huge oil find in the Golan Heights, maybe. There's a huge natural gas field off Cyprus called the Leviathan Field. That's true, it's huge. And ExxonMobil is trying to move its platform into place over that gas field right now. That's part of why the Sixth Fleet is in that area. Now, but that's not what's going on here.
But Steve, before you carry forward with that, let's just back up one quick thought just to throw in there when you mentioned the Sanhedrin. One thing that people may not realize is one of the leading members of the Sanhedrin, that's Rabbi, his name slips my tongue right now, but anyway, they are trying to bring the Muslim world, but who are they trying to bring? It's a group that is a very risque group out of Turkey who's very loyal to President Erdogan, and that's Adnan Akhtar. And we've had several rabbis, including MK member Yehuda Glick, that has met with Adnan Akhtar, and the Turkish newspapers consider him to be a sex cult.
Right, well, there you go. And of course, you know that Erdogan, shall we say, wades in those waters.
Exactly.
And yeah, so what we see here, but yeah, and so we know that this is not, there is nothing that is scriptural of this. The third temple arrived when Mashiach rose from the grave.
Yes.
That's when the third temple arrived. And the third temple is present, the body of Mashiach is present, and so the third temple is here, and it requires sanctification. Now, this coming temple is going to be a counterfeit temple. It's the temple of the coming Antichrist. And so the question is, who is this Antichrist? Is he on the precipice? Is the coming of Mashiach at the door? Is it at the door? I believe it is at the door.
Yes.
And I think this is what's so important about our conference today, Stephen. And this is part of the reason why I was so excited when you contacted me to discuss this, because we know that as of 3 days ago, the Russians had actually encountered, it appears to be maybe a couple of French drones coming into Syria, and they took them down with missiles. And the Russian ministry came out and said, look, if there is any firing on Damascus, we are going to fire back, and we are going to destroy that which fired at Damascus. And now, it boggles my mind, frankly, that America is going to be the agent that's going to make Damascus to become a ruinous heap. That is what boggles my mind. And I don't know how many munitions Trump has prepared, but we do know that some of the guided cruisers, the frigates, the missile cruisers, carry some 90 nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and that there are many of them deployed. So you could see a rain of 400, 500, 800 missiles coming into Syria with the purpose of taking out all defensive targets and with the purpose of destroying Damascus and terminating the Assad regime entirely. Now, we can say, well, that's about oil because we have to get a natural gas pipeline, but I don't believe that. You know, politically speaking, Stephen, when you talk about how the West is arranged, remember that it is the Catholic Church that teaches the doxology, God in three persons, right? Yes. Blessed Trinity in three persons. And that three persons, they have created as a political reality. That is, they have a spiritual head, which would be Vatican. They have a financial head, which would be the Crown of London. And they have a military head, which would be Washington, D.C. For people who don't believe that Washington, D.C. is closely linked to the Vatican, I call your attention to the fact that our Capitol building has a cupola, just as the Vatican does, and an obelisk in the front yard, just as the Vatican does.
Yes.
We have, and on top of the Capitol building is Ishtar, Colombia, who also sits in the harbor of New York. The Statue of Liberty is Ishtar. So we have some very interesting symbolism going on here. When Americans can actually see what it is, we can see this relationship that we got conquered by Rome right after the Civil War. In fact, the Civil War was sponsored by Rome. It was instigated by Rome and put together by the Crown in order to bring in the Catholic Church, which had been prohibited. When John F. Kennedy was elected president of the United States, he was the first Catholic president, and it was a scandal. It was a scandal nationwide that a Catholic had been elected to the presidency. Now we see 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic, and we see the Catholic institutions dominate every major city. The Catholic churches dominate every major city, and the Jesuits are in complete control of the largest states in the country. So there we are. And so when we look at this, when we look at what's happening in Syria, the Syrian regime is being taken down in order to create a chaos in the region that will allow the Vatican to control Jerusalem. It's not about oil, it's not about gas, it's not about a pipeline. It is about Rome securing Jerusalem.
Well, Steve, you made a very interesting point. I mean, we've talked about this before, because when President Trump became president, we both were even hopeful that we might get some peace in the world, maybe a little extension of time before judgment set in. We saw that Trump initially spoke about wanting to try to work something out with Russia, but when they leaked his secret plan for a two-state solution, the call for Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel was almost a joke, because even if you notice his verbiage when he first announced it, he still said status quo for the Temple Mount. But in the leaked part of the plan, which the White House was very upset that it was leaked, maybe not, maybe they intended it to be leaked, but it stated in there that the old city of Jerusalem will come under the protection of a national force. That goes back, Steve, to 1993, 1994, the Pope of Rome making the secret deal that Joel Bannerman, Barry Chamish, both exposed this, the La Stampa, the newspaper, and that, by the way, if any of you ever read the Petrus Romanus, the book there, those guys there, I forget the names there, but they actually found the article La Stampa. That was the one that would actually, I believe he was murdered myself, Steve. but he found that article La Stampa that Joel Bannerman used that showed that the Vatican and the Pope, the Pope of Rome and Shimon Peres were working together, and he had swore to give Jerusalem to the Pope of Rome.
Yes, and I can tell you, if you look closely at the Oslo Accords and you date it, you will find out that it's exactly in the middle of the week between the creation of Israel in this 70-year cycle.
Wow,
so
I
people
didn't
say,
know
well,
that
there's going to
one.
be a treaty in the middle. Yeah, there's a treaty in the middle.
Jeez.
Right there, the Oslo Accords. And so when we look at this, and of course this reflects back on S-181, the UN resolution that supposedly established Israel. Even though the Balfour Declaration established Israel following World War I, the Balfour Declaration did it,
Yes.
because Ephraim, that is to say the United Kingdom, had the authority over the Levant, and they divided it. No one is proposing a two-state solution for Iraq or for Syria or for Kuwait or for Jordan. Nobody comes in and says we need a two-state solution for Jordan. You know, somebody drew the lines with a ruler back in 1918, and that was that. But when it comes to the Israeli state, there's always somebody out there with a ruler saying, let's fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. Now, with that being said, and this resolution S-181, that calls for Jerusalem to be an international city. You were the one that pointed out that they were putting in checkpoints to enter the city in Israeli territory. And you know that's going to happen. You know that they're going to control it. The Vatican intends to have complete control of everything inside the walls of the old city. Right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so as we see that, because they lust after Jerusalem. And so here we have this now, but they're not the only parties at the table. So does Erdogan and the Turks. Now, it's very interesting. People underestimate Erdogan. You have to remember that when we look at the Ottoman Empire, it was called the poor man of Europe when going into World War I. Why was it the poor man of Europe? Because John D. Rockefeller had deprived the Ottomans of their moneymaker, Saudi Arabia. You know, John D. Rockefeller is the one who funded Lawrence of Arabia, a British MI5 agent, to go down and to agitate with some of the most radical Islamic fundamentalists in the area, the Wahhabists. Kind of a similar program. They could have called themselves ISIS back then. And they came in and they worked for a separate state using bloodthirsty jihadist techniques to create the separate state of Saudi Arabia in 1901. They culled out, they took away from the Ottoman Empire its oil riches and put it in the hands of Saudi Arabia that the Rockefeller family could then exploit through Hebron, that is Chevron oil, right? Hebron. And so this is what was happening. And so the Ottomans went broke. When the Ottomans went broke, they couldn't hold on to their empire. So there was no lines. There were no lines there between Turkey and Syria and Jordan and all that. It was just one giant, Ottoman Empire. Now,
well,
when it fell...
This is when, Steve, also the Turkish government, even back in 1858, when they were allowing wealthy Jewish families to return to their homeland, they changed their laws because they were poor then in order to raise tax revenue, because they couldn't get any tax revenue from the peasants who were living inside of modern-day Israel, as we call it today, or the land of Israel. And so they allowed the Jewish people to return there, some of the wealthy ones from Iraq, from Iran, those places there, down from... and they purchased land, all the land all the way down from Tel Aviv, all the way up to Haifa and over to the Galilee. And they were just doing that in order to raise money for taxes there. But that was really, to me, when Israel became a nation. And oddly enough, when when Mahmoud Abbas was opposing the two-state solution that President Trump was putting forth, he had a bunch of maps on the back of the wall showing Israel at their different stages and where their territory, supposed their territory, was shrinking. But he actually has the map of when the Jews originally first began to purchase the land in Israel from 1858 under the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you look at that, most people don't know Jerusalem in 1924 had 25,000 people total. It was a little tiny cow town for all intents and purposes. You had the old city and you had a couple of peripheral villages outside of it. It certainly wasn't today's modern Jerusalem.
No.
And you have to remember that the hand of Yah was upon that land then. It was a desolation because Yah had made it a desolation. And that's why there was no revenue there. When Mark Twain visited the place, he said, "What? There's nothing here. It's a desolation," right? And so now, so when we look at this foundation of Israel, now we can see here that there are some prophetic things happening. And not the UN did not create Israel. It was the hand of Yah that created Israel, that the timing of the repatriation of the tents of the Yahudim would be in accordance with his schedule.
Yes.
Now, I do not believe that the modern world knows who those Yahudim are, but there are some that are in the land that are supposed to be there right now. And we're beginning to see so many things happening because the Ruach HaKodesh is moving through certain of the Yahudim inside the land. There are people who are, teaching the gospel. There are people who are doing things like, for instance, I saw a prayer meeting in Tel Aviv where Jewish Messianic believers were facing Palestinian Christians and praying for each other. Because what is the uniting force? If it's Mashiach is the uniting force, there is no other uniting force. But in the meantime, we do have this Erdogan who is thirsting after Jerusalem. And, in 1917, we had the death of the Ottoman Empire, and they had to retreat. The Ottoman Empire retreated back into the Anatolian Peninsula, and they called that peninsula Turkey. Now, shortly thereafter, they would have this Armenian genocide. They don't want to admit to it, but they killed 2.5 to 3 million Armenians because they believed that the Armenians had sided with the Russians during World War I. And so the Turks, the Ottomans became the Turkish Empire, and the Caliph was declared to have suffered the fatal head wound. That is to say, the Caliphate was over. As soon as the Caliphate was over, they put the Sultan's turban into the glass case. Now, this happened in 1917, and in 1924, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, was born for the purposes of reestablishing the Ottoman Empire. But they have been working, and they've been working diligently now for 100 years. They wrote protocols as to how they were going to do it, published how they were going to overthrow the United States in the 1980s with a list of protocols, some violent jihad, followed by economic jihad, protocols that were enacted entirely by Barack Obama, and who was himself a self-confessed Muslim Brotherhood member. He told them that in his speech of April in 2009 in Cairo. Avi Lipkin's wife is the one, Bernice is the one who translated his speaking in Arabic to them and told the world what he said. And so Barack Obama was, part and parcel of this Muslim Brotherhood overthrow. But in the meantime, something conspicuous happened. And it happened in this culminating year, 2017. 2017 was an extremely important year because it marked 2 jubilees from the liberation of Jerusalem by the house of Ephraim. Very important thing. And Jerusalem became a no man's land for 1 jubilee until 1967. Then in the 1967 war, following the 20th birthday of Israel, you see that Jerusalem is no longer no man's land, but it is in the hands of those people expecting the Mashiach. And so this is all prophetic realization. And then what happens exactly 2 jubilees later? Erdogan unveils the Sultan's turban and restores the Caliphate, declaring himself as God inside the Islamic community. Now let's start talking about Gog and Magog, okay? Because this will lead us right into it. All right, so first of all, to understand Gog and Magog, we have to take a look at this passage in Genesis 10, Bereshit 10, verse 2. And it's talking about the sons of Japhet. The sons of Japhet, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Yavan and Tubal and Meshech and Thrace. Okay, so, and I'll go one further. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphat, and Togarma. Okay, so Togarma is going to play a factor later on. But when we look at that now, this Gog and Magog, right? Or Gog and Magog. Now, it's very interesting because we have this discussion in Ezekiel 38 about Gog and Magog. We also have it in the Quran. It also appears in Gizeon, Revelation. But this Gog and Magog, if you look at this, when we started looking at these names in the Hebrew and started comparing them, one of the things we found out historically is most texts refer to the name Gomer. They'll say Gomer. But if you look historically at what happens, those people were called, through the centuries, the Cimmerians. And the Cimmerians were at one time in southern Ukraine, but they were displaced by the tribes of Israel coming over the Caucasus in the 3rd century and forced back into Turkey. Well, they weren't Cimmerians, they were Gimerians, because the name Gomer is not Gomer at all, it's Gimer. It's like Hagar. People say, well, Abraham was hanging out with Hagar. Well, no, Hagar, the stranger. She was Hagar, the stranger. And so here we have Gimer. Now, Magog is something else too, because when we talk about Gog and Magog, there is one place, Stephen, in Amos 7, where the Sefer makes a correction that's consistent with the Septuagint. It's consistent with the Septuagint because the Septuagint is going to name Gog again in Amos 7. And it's very interesting what's said because, of course, I'm trying to find things here now. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Amos. Because in the Septuagint, you actually have Gog named again. So 7:1 in the Sefer reads this: Thus has Adonai Yahweh showed unto me, and behold, he formed grasshoppers in the beginning of the shooting up of the latter growth. And lo, it was the latter growth after the king's mowings. Now, in the Septuagint, that refers to the king as one Gog, the grasshopper, Gog. Okay, when we talk about Gog and Magog, let's take a look at the Hebrew again. Because the Magogs, let's say that the mem at the beginning of this is mem apostrophe Gog, Magog. So now we're talking about Gog and of Gog.
Yes, or from Gog.
Yeah, or from Gog. Gog and from Gog. All right, now let's compare this to what's happening in the Ottoman Empire. Because we have, if you look at these names, Tubal, Meshech, Yavan, those names were all clustered in the Anatolian Peninsula. Now, Javan was a little bit north, like up around where Thessaloniki is now, Macedonia. That would be Yavan, because Yavan, his sons, would take the islands below. But when you're talking, and Thrace, of course, was this area that is now around Constantinople and up into the Black Sea, Thrace. But the rest of the sons were in the body, the Anatolian Peninsula. The Tubalini. I've met people from the tribe of Tubalini in Georgia. They're clustered up near where Turkey meets Georgia on the Black Sea, the Tubalini. The Meshech Turks are there in Turkey. So you see all these families living in Turkey, with the exception of Medai, because Medai was at one time, like Gemer, in the Ukraine, to the north end of the Black Sea. But Jubilees records that Medai didn't like being there and came down from north of the Black Sea to south of the Caspian Sea, and they became the Medes. They're referred to in the Bible as the Medes. So you have the Medo-Persian Empire, of which Cyrus was its king over the Medes and the Persians. Okay, and then so Gemer had come back, was chased out of Ukraine down into Turkey around Sinop, and the Medes transferred into Iran. Okay, so this is going to be important when we look at Ezekiel 38. Now, so Gog and from Gog, those would be the countries that are going to speak the Turkish form of Arabic. So you have Turkey, then who speaks this Turkish form of Arabic? Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. They speak a Turkish form of Arabic. Pakistan. So you have Erdogan here in command of Gog, Turkey, and from Gog, all of those stand countries, Magog. Gog and Magog. Okay, now let's see how this prophecy works out, because what we're seeing now is you have the Pope of Rome commanding his Trinity, Rome, the Crown, and DC, into starting a war with Russia. Why does he want to start a war with Russia? Well, as you and I referred to earlier before the show started, it was the Vatican who launched against Russia in the late 19th century, responsible for the assassination of Alexander II, responsible for the overthrow of the Tsar and the killing of Nicholas II and his entire family, responsible for the rise of the Bolsheviks, and responsible ultimately for this brutal mass murder of 60 million Orthodox Russians. 60 million Orthodox Russians, because the Catholics would just as soon you be atheist as be anything else, because they will come in with their Jesuit operation and their Romulus and Remus towers of their Catholic Church and dominate over the cities and dominate over the earth quietly at first, but it won't be long before they're controlling the wheat and the tares growing in the garden.
Oh, wow. Steve, listen. I got to throw this one in there. In the book I'm writing, and I haven't revealed the name of the book as of yet, I write about the wheat and the tares. I think I actually spoke about that on Israeli News Live not too long ago, and how that Yeshua comes in there and he says that, we see he gives the parable about the tares, and he said, while men slept. That's actually speaking of the apostles. They're the men that slept, because they were of the ones originally planting the original seed, the word of God that Yeshua had given to his disciples to go and even to the house of Israel, and planting these seeds. While they slept, the enemy comes in and sowed tares in amongst the wheat. That was Nicaea, Rome. This was Satan through the Vatican began to sow in the tares. But then when they saw that the enemy had come, said, Lord, I thought you planted in good seed. He said, yes. He said, but should we go and root them up? He said, no, let them alone. Let them grow until the harvest. He said, at that time, the tares will be gathered together and bound together in a confederacy, we might say, bound together, and they'll be burned. I'm wondering, as a conjecture, if that's not a nuclear war.
And I think it is a nuclear war. And I'll tell you, and this is why I think this program today is so important, because of course we're on the precipice of that nuclear war right now.
Yes.
We're on the precipice of it. And we'll have to speak about that strategically. But let's talk just a little bit more about what's happening prophetically and how this is aligning. Because what will take place is this. What you don't see in Ezekiel 38 is a discussion of America and Russia coming up. You don't see that. Instead, what you see is, it says, and the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of Adam, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog. Okay, so that's Turkey and all of those standing countries, right? The chief prince of Meshech and Tubal in Turkey, and prophesy against him and say, thus says Adonai Yahweh, behold, I'm against you, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I'll turn you back and put hooks in your jaws and bring you forth. So here we go. The hooks are in the jaws now. Everybody is being brought forth with the hook in the jaw. It amazes me, because you would think that Donald Trump would recognize that he's being set up by the deep state. I mean, they're setting him up. Let's see. We'll get him to commit to a red line. The use of gas, I'm not going to tolerate. You want to use phosphorus bombs, that's okay. You want to use nuclear weapons, that's okay. You want to blow people up with the mother of all bombs or the father of all bombs, that's okay. But gas, killing them by gas, that's unwarranted. I'm just not seeing it. You know what I mean? If you're dead, you're dead. And if you're killed by gas, or if you're killed by phosphorus, if you're shot in the back with a machine gun, if you're knifed, if you're beheaded, if you're burned alive in a gas cage, what's the difference? Why is gas the red line? because somebody talked him into it being the red line. This is the one you have to get outraged over, because kids are dying. Do you know how many kids died in Mosul when we bombed the daylights out of that, trying to chase ISIS out of there? There were at least 800 civilian deaths. You know how many civilians we've killed since 1946? How about 30 million? But now we've got a red line. Oh, he's going to use gas. Gas, that's bad, bad, bad. Okay, all right. So he's got a hook in his jaw. That's his hook. Assad's going to use gas. Okay, there's the hook. Now put it in his jaw. Now pull him out. Now he can't stop himself. Even if he knows it's the deep state who has deployed the chlorine and the sarin gas and is using it on the people in East Ghouta, he has to blame that on Assad because he's got that hook in his jaw. In the meantime, Russia has its hook in its jaw. They have to come down and defend Latakia. They have to come down and defend Assad. They have to, and let's talk about that for a minute. What's Russia's thinking? Well, it became very clear because of the big mouth of one Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is now passed. But Zbigniew Brzezinski is the one who said, look, when we're done doing this terrorism in the Middle East, we're going to pack up all these terrorists, many of whom had been shipped down from Chechnya to run ISIS. We're going to pack them up and send them back up to Chechnya. Well, that's in the North Caucasus. For people that are geographically challenged, the North Caucasus are the underbelly of Russia. Now, yes. For those of you, I'll just go into it here for just a little bit. I've spent some time in the North Caucasus. I know the region, right? I mean, you have Cherkessia, you have Kabardino-Balkaria, Ingushetia, North Ossetia, and Chechnya, and Dagestan along those provinces. Only North Ossetia is Orthodox Russian. All those other provinces are Islamic. They're all Islamic. Ruslan Kadyrov is a Muslim who's the governor of Chechnya. And he is the one who has worked on behalf of Moscow to suppress what was an ongoing civil war. I don't know how long it lasted, 18 years, I believe. And the kinds of atrocities that were going on in Chechnya were outrageous. And they had many suicide bombers that were blowing themselves up on planes and setting off bombs in the subways in Moscow, and on and on and on and on. So Putin knows that if he loses in Syria, ISIS will be in Chechnya within days. So he's got a hook in his jaw. He has to fight in Syria because he doesn't want to fight down in the Northern Caucasus. Okay, because they'll be doing to him what they're doing to Assad. So he's going to fight now. So he's got his hook in the jaw. Now, so does Erdogan. He's got his hook in his jaw because he can't allow Jerusalem to be in the hands of the Jews. He cannot allow it. And especially since he's declared himself caliph, he has to secure the so-called third holiest site in Islam, which I don't believe it for a minute that it's the third holiest site, because I don't believe Muhammad went up to heaven from Jerusalem on the white horse named Barak, right? So anyway, but what you see in those names here, now there's other people who are joined with them, right? In verse 5, Persia, Cush, and Libya with them. Persia, Iran, Libya, of course, is now anarchy, but it's also full of Muslim extremists. And Cush, right, the Sudan, all have joined with Turkey. And so you see now, Erdogan now calls 57 nations, 57 Islamic nations to come up against Jerusalem. Now, how big is that army going to be? Oh, probably around 200 million, as prophesied in Kiseon. He will put 200 million. Now, there's something else that I wanted to share with you, Stephen, which is that, when you go to Israel, you know how it is in Israel. You walk around, particularly in Jerusalem. You walk around, oh, this is where Christ was crucified. And here's his tomb. It was given to us by Ivan the Terrible. Oh, wait a minute. Ivan the Terrible reigned in the 1400s. How did the Messiah go in that tomb that was given to you guys by Ivan the Terrible? Well, we don't have an answer for that, but this is the site of the tomb. Here's the rock in which he was washed. On and on it goes. And everybody has a place. This is the place of the skull. That's Joseph's tomb.
Yes.
Joseph of Arimathea. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yes.
You can sightsee for days, and you can get 4 different opinions about every holy site.
Yes. That's exactly right.
Okay, so I want to talk about this valley of Jezreel. You get up there, you're standing there at the site where Elijah supposedly cast down the 400 prophets of Baal. looking out over the valley of Jezreel, which Yitzrael, right?
Yep.
And people will say, well, that's the valley of Armageddon. Now, I mean, I got to tell you, here we are, we're driving through the valley of Armageddon, and I'm seeing this subdivision going up there. The guy was building 4 homes, So we get to a pool, and I'm thinking, okay, let's go to the restaurant here and talk to this contractor. And so you sit down, you're having lunch with him. Hey, what are you up to? Oh, I'm building some spec homes. Where are you building them? Well, I'm building them right there in the Valley of Armageddon. It's an interesting place to construct. But anyway, that's not my point. The point is that area around Afula and in the Valley of Jezreel, what if that's not Armageddon? And I don't believe it is, because in Revelation it talks about Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo. The mountain of Megiddo. And again, when you're talking about the mountain of Megiddo, it's possible that mem, again, is a prefix. Megiddo. The mountain from Giddo. And what if this Har Megiddo, and you've talked about this before too, and I think you've raised a terrific issue. When you're talking about, when you were talking about Yaakov going up to Laban to meet his future wife, right? And how he traveled through what would at that time have been considered the land, right?
Yes.
He traveled through the land, but he traveled through Syria. And he traveled all the way north to Laban to get Rachel and Leah. And, when you see that, you realize, like Paul going up on the road to Damascus, it was nothing for people from Jerusalem to travel to Damascus. There was no passport required. There was no border check. You just go. And so what you see is, and you know how that proximity, how close Damascus is. You could see the shelling up there from Mount Hermon, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so when you see that, I think it's very possible that, in fact, the Valley of Armageddon is not inside modern Israel, but in fact is just to the east of the Golan Heights. When you look out through the Valley of Tears there, you know where I'm talking about, the Valley of Tears?
Yes.
You look past that Valley of Tears, you can see that great plain out there.
It's huge.
Huge. Easily accommodating 200 million man army. And so if that's the case, the nations of the world have already gathered at Armageddon. I mean, Spain, France, Germany, Canada, China, Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Egypt, Israel. I mean, Turkey, they're all gathered there.
Well, that's interesting you bring that out, Steve. I've never thought about it like that before, but right there on the Jordanian border, where borders with Syria there, we have even Germany moved all their air force right there inside of Jordan, which to me it was always for the purpose for taking down Damascus. But you're right. You have we've revealed the fact that the Norwegians were crossing over at Al Tanf, but it just runs into one gigantic plain all the way through there. And yeah, as far as the eye can see, I think you'll see, if you look off to the south, you'll see one mountain way off in the distance. I mean, way, way off in the distance. But other than that, Mount Hermon to the north, it's just nothing but a huge open plain there. And what's really fascinating, as you mentioned too, we talked about where Laban and Yaakov simply made a covenant. You don't cross over this pile of rocks and to do me harm, and I won't cross over there to do you harm. It's troubling to see, but I have been saying for a long time, the nations are gathered, and I've been looking at that being the place that they've gathered, but I've not considered the possibility that could actually be Megiddo, or as you would say, from Giddo, would be possibly exactly what we're looking at. So geographically, the nations have already gathered there for the battle, this great battle, and this is believed to be where the flashpoint will happen. And it's what it's exactly looking like, and when people say that, well, we're just, Russian propaganda, my entire objective has been from the beginning, Steve, is to try to get the people that influence their politicians in America, that have a vote, that have a right to say, that they can wake up and see what's really happening, that Russia is not our enemy as Americans. And we're not the enemies of Russia. But if we could wake up and recognize that the deep state is controlling the agenda, and of course Rome is controlling the deep state. Rome is controlling Erdogan. That's why Erdogan goes and meet with the Pope. They had the one thing in common, Jerusalem, which we already know what that issue is all about. I'm watching all the pieces of the puzzle here are being put together. And it's very troubling because now I see, no matter what you say, there's channels been raised up only to try to stop the influence that we were having amongst the evangelical, the Messianic communities there, because they were hearing the truth and they couldn't stand that. So they raised up channels against our channel there to bring in the mainstream agenda, because they want that Russian war. They want the United States and Russia to fight. And they have no idea, Steve, when we're looking at Isaiah 17, we look at the fall of Damascus, the fortress ceases with Ephraim when Damascus falls. Those Christians that were believers in the message of Yeshua that we read about in John chapter 4, their fortress, because Assad has been a fortress for the Christian community, that will fall. These jihadists that we've been backing will be murdered. And in verse 10, God says, he says the reason why this happens, he tells us why. He says, you have forgotten the rock of your salvation. The only ones that know that the rock, that Christ, that Yeshua is the rock, Yeshua, however you're going to call his name, Jesus, etc., it's the Christians, which are, many of them, are descendants of the house of Israel. And you have forgotten the rock of your salvation, and you're allowing this war to happen, which puts the blood of the Syrian population, it puts the blood of Ephraim. And here's the thing, Steve. It's not that God won't forgive it, because he does. He goes on. He said his hand is still outstretched still. That's in Isaiah 9 when he says that there, when he shows Ephraim and Manasseh are devouring one another's arm. And you know very well, better than anybody, about the descendants of Manasseh being from Russia, Ephraim from Great Britain and the British empires, which are, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, etc. And yet in the NATO countries, and all of those are coming together to kill one another. And in the end, whatever's left over is going to take out Israel, along with Erdogan's group.
Yeah. Now that point you made, and I know we're getting a little bit of a bandwidth problem here. The point that you made concerning the fortress of Ephraim, okay? Remember that also the fortress of Ephraim is Washington, D.C. That is the fortress of Ephraim too. And I think when you look closely at that prophecy, it is the larger fortress of Ephraim that is going to enact this final blow to Damascus. And so if Trump makes the decision that he's going to go in and he is going to, I've had it, they've crossed my red line, I'm going to destroy Damascus, I'm going to take down Assad. And that will be a massive, massive strike if it happens. If that does happen, then everything is on. Now, I'm just going to speculate what I believe will take place from a battle strategy, okay? Let's just take a look at the armament that's in the region. Let's take a look at the battle strategy and see if we can map it out. Are we still good on this bandwidth, Stephen? Can we still continue?
We've got audio, Steve. So we'll continue on. We don't. The image is frozen, but we have audio.
Okay. All right. So what I believe will happen is Trump will probably launch, and he'll launch with a dramatic and emphatic strike, and it will come from both the Red Sea, and it will come from the Persian Gulf, and it will come primarily from the Caribbean. And there will be such an overwhelming force of launches because they have to defeat the S-400s and the S-500s on the ground in Syria.
That's breaking of the bars of Damascus according to the prophecy there. That's my thought on that, Steve, that the S-400 and 300 system is the bars of Damascus, and Scripture says they're going to fall.
Yes, and so, I mean, it will be fairly easy I mean, and when you have these deployed S-300s and S-400s, if you put, say, a tactical nuclear device in the 20 to 40 kiloton range, and you detonate it in the air, it creates an electromagnetic pulse. It will also, it will destabilize and destroy whatever electronic systems you're using to run those anti-batteries. Now, in addition to that, you can also pummel the area and have a significant enough collateral explosion to where you will take out those systems. In other words, you might be able to take out the first couple, but eventually 3 or 4 get through, 5 or 6 get through. And so this is why it would be an overwhelming, this is why it has to be an overwhelming strike and will be an overwhelming strike. Now, the Russians have said, if that strike takes place, we will attack any vessel that launched those things. So it's going to be a coordinated attack between Iran and Russia. Iran, of course, will be launching its S-400s and S-500 systems at the USS Roosevelt Task Force in the Persian Gulf, which may or may not ever escape the Persian Gulf. Russia could deploy its its sub-drones with their 1 megaton warheads that they can use for trying to sink the entire 6th Fleet. You know, if you touch off a nuclear weapon 1 mile beneath the surface or even 1,000 feet beneath the surface, you create a hole in the water, a huge hole, into which the ships fall, and the water comes over the top of it. And so this is another strike that they could use against the 6th Fleet, in addition to deploying their bombers, which they've already moved their supersonic bombers into position, and they've prepared them for strikes, and they've also moved their aircraft in. Remember that they have tactical EMP weapons, the Russians do, that can completely shut down the ship systems of any of the ships that we have in the Mediterranean. So they can move in with the Su-24s or 25s with those EMPs and destabilize and otherwise shut down all of the systems on board those ships, making them sitting ducks for whatever target may follow. So now this was what you would see in the initial salvo. Now, there have been rumors that China may be getting involved with this, that China's deployed subs off the U.S. coast with the deployment of over 200 nuclear weapons with a poised preemptive strike against the U.S. The Russians may also move, at this point when you realize, okay, they've struck Damascus, Latakia is totaled, Damascus is a ruinous heap. All of the military systems that are deployed in Syria have been destroyed with this overwhelming strike force. The Russians have struck back and taken down the Mediterranean fleet. There have been cruise missiles launched against the fleet in the Red Sea, and the Iranians have bombed the USS Roosevelt Task Force. Remember that prophecy says also that Edom will be a desolation. Now, this is an important thing because we're talking about Elam, that is to say Persia, ultimately coming against Saudi Arabia. And this is exactly what they will do because all the intelligence agencies know that the true impetus, the true pushing force for ISIS in the region, the reason ISIS has never gone away and al-Nusra has never gone away and all the other jihadists that are operating in Syria have never gone away is because they're funded by Saudi Arabia and by Qatar and by Bahrain and Kuwait. And so Iran is going to move against Edom, and they're going to move against Edom in a huge way, and the scripture indicates that it's going to be a total devastation. Edom will be totally destroyed. And so what we see here is, when we look at this, now once that takes place, let's say this is a one-day transaction. Maybe it's a few hours. Maybe it's 4 or 5 hours that this takes place. After those 4 or 5 hours, will Russia conclude that they are about to be struck by a preemptive strike from the United States with a massive nuclear retaliation against Russia? Will they reach that conclusion? If they do reach that conclusion, they will launch against the United States with devastating authority. Now, Scripture, I don't believe, talks about the destruction of Manasseh or in Russia, but it does talk about the destruction of Babylon. And as we began our discussion earlier today, we were talking about the U.S. Capitol, how it has Ishtar on top of the Capitol building, how Ishtar sits in New York Harbor. And, you know, Babel itself, if you look at that word in Hebrew, Beit Lamed, you see that you have Beit, this middle letter, trapped in the house of Baal. The little house, the Beit, is trapped in the house of Baal. And this is what you see in Babylon when the nation of Yahud was taken captive during the captivity. They were taken into captivity into Babylon. They were the little house captured by the house of Baal, Babel. And what we see in America is we see that the whole of Yasharel, the tribes of Yasharel, are found in the United States. But we are slaves to Babel. We are slaves to the deep state. We are slaves to the shadow government. We are slaves to the Federal Reserve and its controlling authorities. We are slaves to the tripartite relationship between Rome, the Crown of London, and Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And so that's how I would put it. That's what I see happening from a strategic point of view.
I agree with you, Steve, and it makes more sense day by day. And of course, you know, the Vatican wants to put Jerusalem as their new headquarters. And perhaps they realize as well, because Babylon, you have Mystery Babylon, then you have, I've always called it United States as Babylon by extension. And so does Rome get destroyed as well? And if so, will they make Jerusalem their new headquarters with, now that the United States and Russia are weakened? Because even if Russia does, let's say Russia becomes dominant in the war and wins, so to speak, they will be so weakened by nuclear devastation on their end as well that Erdogan would be able to carry out whatever Rome's desire is at that point. And then this is, at that point, I think this is when Yahushua will have to take and return Yeshua in order to deliver his people from the Roman occupation. You know, the apostles wanted to be delivered from Rome back 2,000 years ago. They thought when he was coming to liberate them from Rome. And so Rome has to be in control of Jerusalem once again, in control of all the country of Israel, because the stage is just being reset. What's your thoughts there, Steve?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think what you'll see is, first of all, I don't think that Rome cares one iota what happens to America. They see Americans, you know, the UN has ordered Barack Obama to disarm America, and they've ordered Donald Trump to disarm America. And so what you see is you see these groups. You know, there was another shooting today at a Maryland high school. You see these groups going out, and, you know, it's not these students that are being set up as patsies that are doing these shootings. These are black ops that are doing these shootings. They're killing American citizens with acts of terror in order to get the firearms out of the hands of the American people. Why?
Yes.
Why are they so desperate to get firearms out of the hands of the American people? Because they know that the economy is about to totally crash, and that they will not be able to contain what's going to happen in this country. And, you know, just a word of advice to the Vatican, the UN, and those people who are trying to remove the firearms. When this anarchy comes to this country, it doesn't make any difference what the weapons will be. People use boards with nails on the end to do what they're going to do.
Yes.
Because the anarchy that's coming is going to be of such intense anger and frustration over the surveillance state and this right that we have been given at the hands of the Scherf family over the last 50 years, that people are going to rise up. Now, I'm not one of them, okay? I am a person of the Word. My mission in this life is to deliver the Word, the Scriptures of Yah, as best as I possibly can.
Right.
And believe me, I have my hands full doing that.
I've always felt like the same, Steve, you know, because, you know, I mean, I of course, I have from the days when I used to hunt. I don't hunt any longer, but I still have, those types of guns. I don't have assault rifles or anything of that nature. I have personally believed, because I used to be a law enforcement. I was also did undercover work. I did narcotics. Many times when we would go on raids, we always did it with overwhelming force, so that those that we were coming up against would the objective was that they would cow down and they would concede and not fight. And this is what when this call comes down to a head and the economy crashes, the government is prepared. They're going to come in with an overwhelming force, and it would just be a bloodbath. I know there's a lot of people that say, no, my dad used to always say it. They won't get my guns until they pry my cold dead fingers from it, from the bumper sticker they used to have years ago.
Right.
But I just hate to say it. I think the best thing, if you want to be able to try to keep it as long as you can, live way out in the country to where you're the last to be affected by it. Get away from the cities. That'd be the one thing I would suggest to people. Maybe there you can get away with it to some degree, but it'll only be a matter of time, though. They're going to take them regardless.
Sure, and again, they're going to do it at the orders of the Vatican.
Yes.
And I personally believe the Vatican was controlling the weapons that caused the fires in California, the directed energy weapons, that there was plenty of evidence of those being used in Southern Cal and up in Sonoma County. And I believe the Vatican is controlling the chemtrails that are being sprayed all over the country and really all over the world.
Wow.
And so the Vatican has an intrinsic hatred for America, particularly Americans that remember America. They don't believe in constitutional rights. They believe in the authority of the Catholic Church, and they believe that they're clergy and we are laity. The doctrine of the Nicolaitans.
Yes.
And so you've heard the Pope come out and express it, that we need a one world government, and that the United States needs to be. He's made it very clear what he wants for the United States. And so for him to encourage a war between Russia and the United States, first of all, if Russia gets destroyed, particularly European Russia, where 90% of Russians live. It's not a big country. It's less than 150 million people, and they're about 90% Orthodox. So the church wipes out all of these Orthodox that they want to get rid of, and they wipe out, more importantly, the seed of the Orthodox rebellion from the universalism of the Catholic Church. And then on the other hand, they wipe out America, which is a bunch of people who think that they have a right to live a middle-class lifestyle, and that they have a right to freedom when they don't. Clearly everybody has to come under the authority of the church. And after this war is over, you'll see a blistered United States, a burning ruin, and actually Scripture describes it as being so desolate, no one can live here. No one can live here. And then you'll see Russia probably in a very similar circumstance. And so they're not going to be factors at all. So now what do you see? Well, now we have little Israel sitting there. You have this international community that's been created in Jerusalem, and then you have the 57 nations of Islam gathering their armies in the Valley of Armageddon to take all of Israel and declare it under the caliphate. Remember that in Islam, it's taught this Mahdi, right? This 12th Imam will come to convert the whole world to Islam. And so they have an expectation that the whole world will be Islamic, and they intend to follow through with that, even if it comes down to a disagreement between Erdogan and the Pope. Erdogan believes he is the Caliph. Erdogan believes he is God. Erdogan believes he is the 12th Imam. He is the Mahdi. And so here we are, set to see this play out on stage in a rather huge way. So for those who are listening to this broadcast today, and again, blessings to you, Stephen, and your ministry, and your whole family for risking your life to do this. I just want to say this: the most important thing for a person to do is to correct his path before Yah. And this means that you can't sit here and say, "Oh, well, this is I do these things because this is what it means to me," or "God knows my heart." Since 2008, the Ruach HaKodesh has been calling it, has been saying, come back to me. And the people who are going to be under the wings of the eagle, the people who are going to be with the woman in the wilderness, are those who have the testimony of Hamashiach and who keep his commandments. Now that's clear what the edict is.
That's right.
And so this is why, in the keeping of the commandments, the people who are sitting asleep in a church, whose pastor is slowly converting the church over to a social club and a counseling center and all of these other things that have absolutely nothing to do with walking out the way, the truth, and the life. You need to ask yourself the question, because you sit through a 45-minute sermon once a week, do you have salvation? Are you doing anything to work out your salvation? What is your call? Have you found your purpose? Do you know for certain in your life, this is what Yah has called you to do, and you're doing it with excellence? Because he has a plan for every single person. If you don't know it, and you're not doing it, it's because you have ears that can't hear and eyes that can't see. Because you refuse to renew your mind with your own discernment. And so now the time has come. Open your eyes, open your ears, and hear the truth. Allow the Holy Spirit to put a heart of flesh into you. And once you see this heart of flesh, you need to begin to keep his Shabbat. You need to begin to keep his feasts. You need to begin to walk in his calendar and in his rhythm. And if you do that, you will see that he will reveal himself to you. Why? Because of what it says in Deuteronomy 29:29. Because the secrets of Yah are reserved unto Yaakov and his children through the observance of every word of the Torah. And those secrets will be revealed to you. The blessing, Aharon's blessing, will be upon you when he puts his name upon you. And when he puts his name upon you, he will put his seal upon you, and his seal is the Shabbat. This is the sign that distinguishes you from Rome.
That is so true, Steve, too. And, you cannot, as it says in the book of Revelation, those that have the testimony of Yeshua, Jesus Christ, and keep his commandments. So the commandments are not the 663 laws of Levitical laws that were handed down there, but there are the 10 commandments that were given on Mount Hebron. Excuse me, not Hebron, but Mount Horeb.
Horeb.
And these are the simple ones, and the Sabbath is included in there. You can't, how can you say thou shalt not kill, or thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife, or you're not going to commit adultery, and you're willing to keep all the basics there and then throw out the Sabbath as well? It doesn't work. We've got to honor the Sabbath, and in order to be blessed of God. And I've always said, if you will honor the Sabbath, God will honor you. And there's just no way around that. And like you said, it separates from Romanism to that of the true believers. Anyway, Steve, in closing here, I would like for you to just share with the people. I know that you and Brad Huckins, you guys work very diligently on the Et Sefer. It is a compilation of sacred scriptures for people that don't know. We have, I think, a couple of copies ourselves. I don't know if you guys have got the one online yet or not, but I know that there's talk about that. And, if people would like to order a copy of this, I think it'd be a blessing to them. And I know that Stephen, the group there, they do offer a discount. If you put in INL as a code, it gives you a little option to put in a discount code. If you put INL in there, you do get a discount if you order it that way, which blesses the ministry here, as well as will save you money in ordering it. So, Steve, can you tell a little bit about that?
Sure, and I'll tell you, we just released the 3rd edition, revision 1. And if we still had video up, I'd show it to you. The book is a lot thinner now, Stephen. It's only 2 inches thick now. and it's gone from being 6 pounds down to 4.5 pounds. So it's lighter, it's more manageable, and the font is bigger. So it's even easier to read. All the books are there, all the maps are there. And in addition to that, we also have, there's other books that are available through the website. We have the lexicon, which gives you the transliterations and the definitions for the 3,100 names that have been transliterated into Sefer. It's a great companion. We also have just released Josephus Antiquities. It's a beautiful book, and it's all of antiquities in a hardbound. And we're going to be following that with Josephus Wars and the remainder of the Josephus collection, which includes against Appian and some other writings. And so Josephus will be a full complement when we're done with that. We have the Yom Kodesh, which gives you the calendar, the Hebrew calendar. We also have the Parshat, which is Torah portions, and Haftarah and Veserah portions that are structured throughout the entirety using the Et Sefer as its text. And there's the Sitri Torah and the Veserot. The Veserot is, now the Veserot, I'll tell you, that this is a book I worked hard on. I love that book. It's a book that has Hebrew interlineations throughout the text. In other words, because the Gospels, we only have copies in Greek. There have been some translations, but they may or may not be true. So there's Hebrew ideas that are put in. And in addition to that, I have all of the text of the Gospel according to the Hebrews, which were fragments found in the writings of Eusebius. Plus, I have some other direct translations, like the blessing of the bread and wine at the Last Supper. I have that in Hebrew. I have the Our Father prayer in Hebrew. We have there's other tools that are there for the Messianic leader or teacher to have a real handle on the Gospels here that can really help you transfer back and forth its Hebraic identity. And anyway, any of those books that you decide, if you decide you want to add those to your collection, all of that is subject to the same discount under the coupon code INL. You can also get a carrying case, you can get tabs for the Sefer. All of that will be subject to the discount code. Now, the app, on the other hand, which is available for download on your Droid or your Apple or your BlackBerry or Kindle, the app has a fixed price through Google Play or Amazon Store or whatever, and those are part of the terms and conditions. So we can't offer a discount on those on the app prices. But for people that are in Europe and people that are facing, an expensive freight bill and a tariff when the book comes into Europe or into Australia or in some of the other places where Israeli News Live is heard, the app is a viable option if you have a smartphone, because that comes complete with the lexicon. It has a robust search engine, allows you to highlight, allows you to take notes, allows you to copy and paste. And so it's really quite a tool for those people who like to share scriptures with others in social media or through email. So all of that is available, and we'd encourage you, we do want to bless Israeli News Live as much as we can. If you use the coupon code INL, you'll get a 10% discount, and we will be able to bless Israeli News Live from the Sefer Publishing Group. Again, Israeli News Live is one of, it's my most favorite YouTube channel. And I just got to tell you, Stephen, you and I see eye to eye on so many things. It's always a great joy to talk with you, and I'm glad to see that you're still up and running.
Thank you. We did open up the live stream, Israeli News Live. We're waiting to get our internet to where we can publish a little bit better on there. We did the new live stream platform, which if you pay the annual fee in advance, they give you a 50% discount. We did it. The people helped us to make that happen. That also allows us to air on Roku television. And a sister, she was kind enough to send us the information how people can do that. So if you're watching, I will just tell you that, because we are going to be running simultaneously on Israeli News Live on live stream. She said to us, it's 2 steps. You go to Roku TV, you search for live stream app on Roku TV, you download that app, And once you've downloaded that app, all you have to do is search for Israeli News Live, and then you will be able to watch Israeli News Live on Roku TV as well as on live stream if you're doing it from your computer. We did that as a backup platform because we are now experiencing shutdowns. We got knocked off of Twitter. They didn't fully knock me off. They were very clever in how they did it. For about 5 days, I was not allowed to retweet anything. I was not allowed to see no more than about 5 Twitter pages that would come open. And anytime I wanted to see something new, I had to refresh the page. I was not allowed to translate anything on the Twitter account whatsoever. And so I'm like, okay, I know why this happened, but that's okay. They're just looking to do everything they can to keep the people dumbed down, to keep them into the mainstream agenda, the propaganda that we're facing in the West. And Steve, you coming on today, I think really helps people to see that, we're not the only ones out there that recognize the acts that are happening. And for you to know a lot of these things from your own perspective is a blessing, I know, for the people that are watching. And it's a very, brother, I'll tell you, it's a very small minority of people that really understand what's happening in this world. And I'm afraid that too many people are going to really be duped into a very sinister future that will be controlled by Rome. And unfortunately, their pastors, their leaders, and even online ministries are leading these people, whether they're doing it open-eyed or not. As the Bible says, that the blind lead the blind, they both fall in the ditch. So it could just be that there's blind ministers that are leading the people by the way of propaganda. And it doesn't make you anti-American to tell the truth. You're this, if anything, you're a true American for trying to warn the people of what's coming. And I would love to have seen President Trump make peace with Russia. Simply for the fact is, we might have had a little bit more time. But then again, I'm also looking forward to the coming of the Mashiach, so which we know who the Mashiach is. So it's going to be a rough road, but it's the better road.
And ultimately, it is the plan of Yah. I mean, all of this is in his hands. And I do believe that he is just, and he is merciful, he is good, and his mercy continues forever, right?
Yes.
And so I do believe that, but I do believe that he has looked at America and what we have done, and we were blessed as a nation when we were formed, and we have rebuked that blessing, and we have walked in darkness, and now we walk behind Luciferian leaders who are engaged in child sacrifice and blood drinking and worshiping Lucifer and everything else. And we're not alarmed by that. We're not ashamed by that. We're not outraged by that. Instead, we tolerate it. And as we tolerate it, it gets worse and worse and worse. And ultimately, you cannot have, if the blood of Havel cried out from the ground and Yah heard it, how much louder are the screams of the 60 million babies dead in this country?
Yes.
How much louder are the screams of the 30 million innocents killed around the world since 1946? You think Yah doesn't hear that? You think he doesn't see that? He sees it and he knows it. And without a repentant heart and without this country turning, and I don't see this country turning at all, but I see as a country rebelling from those people telling them that they need to repent. They rebel. They argue. They come up with a reason and a justification to continue the sinful life that they're carrying on, and continuing the justification for the storm that is about to come on us all.
That's
and there
right.
will be no one that will not be affected by this storm.
That's right. That's right. Brother Steve, God bless you. Thank you for coming on with us today. Shalom to all of you guys out there. We appreciate you listening, and hopefully it's a blessing to you. You can also, just real quick, it's Etsefer. Is that .net, Steve?
Yes, CEPHER.net will take you right to the site.
Okay, without the et.
without the et, right?
Okay, so just www.sepher, which means book in English, CEPHER.net. God bless you and shalom.